Okie doke. Right, let's get ourselves a good starting point. Okay, right, so good morning everybody. This is Lana Hempsall and the Norwich Guide Dog Forum and our usual Wednesday morning little broadcast, which today is going to be brought to you slightly later because I can't get Zoom and Facebook to talk today, but never mind. So if you're watching this, you've got a recording placed on Facebook, so you have got to it at some point in the day. So today I have the huge privilege of talking to Richard Porritt. Richard Porritt is the business and political editor at the EDP, and I met him a few years ago in a different lifetime when the world was different and people were different and just generally everything was different. But I think the way things are going, I think Richard's input today is going to be really, really, really good. And I want to talk to Richard about, being a journalist and the work that he does, and hopefully he'll be able to I don't know, empower and impassion a lot of you to think about journalism and how it shapes our world and our thoughts, and maybe try it out yourself. So welcome, Richard. I'm so pleased that you're here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an absolute delight. And as you said, we've known each other for a couple of years, and we've always got on really well. So it's great that you're expanding into this new world of podcasts and wherever you call a video podcast, I'm not sure, but it's great that people are vlog, I'm not sure, but absolutely delighted to be here, and we'll answer all of your questions as the very best I can.
Oh, well, that's brilliant. Yes, and it's nice to have you on the other side of the microphone, so to speak. So Richard, how did you get into journalism? How did what was kind of that starting point for you?
It wasn't probably the most obvious route. I guess normally people, certainly. So I've been a journalist for about 20 years now, and I know I don't look old enough, Lana. I absolutely am aware that I still pass as a trainee, but it's about 20 years now since I scribbled my first bit of shorthand and filed my first copy. And normally people would. It's a trade, so you don't actually have to have a university degree, but the majority of our trainees in journalism do have a degree. And I was always obsessed with current affairs, always. So my treat, I grew up in the north of England in Yorkshire, and my treat on a Saturday when my mum used to take me into our local town centre in Huddersfield was that I would get to buy a newspaper of my choice, and I would pick a different one every week. And I have to say, the first thing I read was the sports pages, but I would then devour the rest of it. Always a big fan of the news. I would always watch the news round, the sort of kids news when I was a small kid, but then would stay with it and watch the 6 o'clock news as well. I was always fascinated by what was going on sort of outside the four walls that I lived in. And then when I got into my teenage years, I sort of thought, well, maybe, I liked writing, and I'll come on to explain why writing is not actually the most important thing when it comes to journalism, but I did like writing. I'm no Shakespeare by any means, but I enjoyed that side of things. And I said to my father, I said, you know what, maybe I could be a journalist. And with the best will in the world, he scoffed at me and said, Richard, the only people that become journalists and reporters are the editor's sons. There's a lot of nepotism. And he said, what, you need a career for life. And my father had been a retail manager, had been a supermarket manager. He said, why don't you, people always need to buy things. Why don't you, it is a good point. What he didn't foresee, of course, was the rise in internet shopping. But nonetheless, he said, why don't you go and do that? So after my A-levels, I applied for universities, but I took a year out. Unfortunately, we were not well-heeled enough for me to go travelling the world. So I just went and got a job, and I got a job in the local Sainsbury's, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I think one of the managers there sort of spotted that I was reliable and enjoyed my work, and said, "Oh, you should apply for the trainee scheme." So I thought, and they offered me the pricey sum of £19,000 a year, which for me then seemed like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be the richest kid on the block. And I applied, and I didn't really think I'd get in, and I knew that I was probably going to go to university anyway. So I didn't. I have to say, it was more of something to do, a bit of fun. But anyway, I was accepted, much to my shock and indeed horror. And so that 2 years, that gap year ended up becoming 2 years, because although I started the training as a training manager, it became quickly apparent that I was the worst retail manager perhaps ever to have donned a Sainsbury's name badge. I was utterly awful. One quick story I'll tell you is when I accidentally ordered not 4 boxes of Dutch Avocat at the Sainsbury's in Dewsbury, but 4 trolley loads. I'm told that they're still selling the Dutch Avocat at Christmas in Dewsbury that I accidentally ordered more than 20 years ago. So after that, I went to university. I studied English literature. I was lucky to... I then decided I did want to be a journalist, even though it seemed like to use a current phrase, it seemed like a moonshot that I would ever be a journalist to me at that stage. I got involved very heavily with the student newspaper. I was very lucky that I had a tutor, or there was a tutor at the university called Granville Williams, who'd been the industrial correspondent on national newspapers, and he really sort of helped me with regards to what a journalist was and what they did. And then I think the big turning point was one day when I learned that, and I still consuming every newspaper, no matter what the politics was. You know, I bought the Guardian, I bought the Daily Mail, I bought the Telegraph, I bought all the local papers. I consumed them all. This is before the internet news was a big deal. And a new newspaper, a new local newspaper launched, an independent newspaper launched in Dewsbury, which is a small town next to Huddersfield. And I refer to it these days, and have for a long time, as Newsbury, because it's a very, very newsy patch. There's lots going on. There's a real mix of people there, mix of ethnic backgrounds, a mix of some quite wealthy people and some very, very, very poor people. So really interesting patch. So they launched this new newspaper there. I was, at this point, a student, but still working in the supermarket. They kept me on, bless them, even when I was a student, not as a manager, but as a supervisor. And one of the jobs was that I would do the newspaper returns. So the newspapers that weren't bought would be picked up by Menzies, which is a company that delivers newspapers, and we would sign a form saying, 10 have gone back or whatever. And this new newspaper had its first week 1, and I loved it. It was brilliant, a really dirty little tabloid newspaper. And really, though, ballsy and, holding police and councils and people to account, really interesting. And the delivery man came to get the papers, and he said, "Have you got any returns?" And I said, "You know what, we sold out. We sold out on your first week of your new newspaper. It's absolutely fascinating that it's done so well." And I said, "I'm a student journalist. I'm really interested in this paper." I said, do you know the people who were there, or are you just a delivery driver? Well, I wonder if I could write something. And he just sort of nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm interested in this paper as well." And then he said, "Well, if you're interested, maybe I'll give you my card." And he passed it and he walked off. And I thought, why? I don't want to deliver newspapers. I don't want to go around in a white van deliver. I want to write for them. And I looked at the card, and it was the editor. He was delivering his own newspapers. That's how it was, that much of a shoestring. And this was a chap called Danny Lockwood. And Danny was a massive influence on my early career. A real old-fashioned newspaper editor. He would be lovely and fantastic one minute, and the next minute he would be kicking the door open. We could tell his mood when he arrived in the office by whether he opened the door or kicked it open. He would take power naps on the floor of his office. A real character and an absolutely fascinating chap. And he said, "Come in and do 2 days a week work experience with us, completely unpaid." So I was doing that. I was a student and I was working at Sainsbury's, so I was a very busy young man. But I just fell in love with it immediately. And on the day of my final exam at university, I had a very big rudimentary mobile phone, which probably cost me a fortune, in my pocket. and it was on vibrate, and it vibrated the whole time. And when I got out afterwards, it was the news editor of that paper, another person who's been a huge influence in my career, a chap called Martin Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "We'd like to offer you a job."
Nice.
So I finished my exams on the Wednesday or Thursday, and I basically started work as a journalist on the following Monday.
Mm.
And I was their only reporter. We didn't have a photographer. And Martin Shaw, over the next 9 months, basically taught me how to write a newspaper article. He taught me what a news story was. He taught me how to get news stories. And at the end of that, it turns out I was, even if I do so myself, I was pretty good. I'd done, thanks to those guys helping me.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, for me, looking back, and for them as well, I think, because we all got on like a house on fire, after just 9 months, the Huddersfield Daily Examiner, very storied newspaper in the north of England, came knocking and poached me basically, and off I went to a big newsroom, and they sent me to Newcastle, where I did all the proper training and learned about law and learnt my shorthand and all that kind of thing. And I did 4 months training, and went back to Huddersfield, and within a year, I would say, I was a senior. Usually it takes 2 years, but I was just so obsessed with it. It was all I did. Even in my spare time, I was doing it. I just complete obsession.
That's what I get about you, that this is because I've often spoken to people, and journalism it can't be a job. To do it properly, it is a vocation. It's something that you would do regardless, whatever your day was,
I often
weekday, night, day, it's literally the call comes and you're out the door with your bag, isn't it? It's just one of those things, isn't it?
I think I often say that I say it quietly, but I would probably do this for free. I would find a way to do this. This is my hobby. I'm very lucky that I get paid for it. Journalism doesn't pay well. And even in the higher echelons, and actually I did end up getting quite far up the ladder. I became the investigations editor at the Examiner. I was then snapped up by the Nationals. I went to work for, in London, I was a very young age, about 27 actually, I was the night editor of the Press Association, which is the national newswire in this country.
Yes, you spent time in London, didn't you? I remember.
I did, yeah. And then, about 75% of the words you read in any given newspaper or on any given website is actually from the Press Association. They do the backbone of the stories, the facts, basically, and the newspapers spin those facts around. I then went on to be a deputy news editor at the Daily Mail. Only had a short period there. I was headhunted again by the Evening Standard, where I was the executive news editor.
So what's it like down Strand ways? Is it very, very, very different? Is it quite, because I remember when I first met you, and all the journalists I'd sort of come across were sort of quite, what's the word? Docile?
I'll tell you.
And you were just sort of like Rottweiler like, and I was like, whoa, Richard.
Yeah, I think
is that kind of the general spirit of things down in the Strand?
Yeah, certainly working on the Nationals in London, I think you do look at things differently. The pressures are huge. I was also a reporter for the News of the World for a while, right in the midst of that newsroom being completely out of control. I'm completely innocent. I'm not hacking your phone, Lana. I never have, and I never would. But it was, the pressures on those guys were immense. Not just to get a story, but to make sure it was exclusive and to make sure no one else had got it. And there is a dark art to that. There are things that you are required to do to make sure that you've got that exclusive. Things have changed a little bit, but I think I learned from that you've got to be aggressive in a friendly way. You'd have to be, you'd have to be nasty or mean or anything, but you do need to be aggressive with people to try and get the truth out there. And that's something that I've brought along. I mean, a quick little story about the News of the World. I was a casual there, so I was a freelance, but I was on very regular shifts, and I was going on holiday. And it was the first day off I'd had in 3 months, actually, and I was packing the car. Living in Central, and I was packing the car up. We were actually coming out to the east of England, which is why I ended up here, because we used to holiday here. But I just shut the boot. Phone rang. It was the news desk, the World News desk. They wanted me to go to Edinburgh, I think, on a story. And I said, "Oh, I just can't. I'm about to go on holiday, you know." And they said, "Well, someone else will do it if you don't." So I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I need a day off." And I was never called again by the News of the World. That was my last. That's how brutal it is.
Yeah.
Because the News of the World, in my opinion, sadly, is gone now. And times have changed. Fleet Street is not as brutal as it was. But you know, when I was at the Evening Standard, my driver used to pick me up at 4:30 in the morning. I would get home maybe 8:00 in the evening. You know, it was non-stop, absolutely non-stop. And if something happens on a Sunday afternoon, you've got to drop everything. Doesn't matter if you've got kids, doesn't matter if you're at a wedding, doesn't matter even if it's your own wedding. You've got to drop, you are expected to drop it all and do it. It's not like that in the regional papers. There is a far better life-work balance. I had a little bit of time as a parliamentary lobbyist, and then I came back to regional papers. I was freelance for a little while, and then when Brexit happened, I found that I was getting a lot of calls from news desks who wanted, you know, my guys who I'd worked with before, who trusted me and knew they could rely on me, and I was writing a lot more stuff. Archant, which is the media company that publishes the EDP and the East Anglian Daily Times and hundreds of newspapers, in fact, across great swathes of the country, had changed a great deal. We had a new chief content officer who's still with me, my ultimate boss, Matt Kelly, who'd been in the Nationals, and we managed to get together a group of people who, and it's I'm in no way playing down the skills of regional reporters, because they are vital and very much needed, but we managed to get together 3 or 4 guys who had been on Nationals and maybe just brought a little bit of that thinking into our regional papers. And I don't mean made them more aggressive, because it's a very different audience. You know, we feel very passionately we've got to serve our community here in Norfolk and beyond in a different way that a national newspaper serves its reader. You know, our audience is richer. And I always say, you know, if you don't like the story you write about me, you know where the office is, you can't miss it. It's got a massive big sign. I leave at about 5:30, 6 o'clock. You can come and punch me on the nose. You know, when you're on a national, the people you write about, you're never going to meet. You're never going to see them. So it's very different. But the way that we treat our staff and the expectations now are higher. And what we are able to do, therefore, is drive our readership and our quality. And a lot of people say, and there'll be people who listen to this who maybe read the EDP and can remember it 30 years ago, will say it's not the paper it was. I disagree. I think there's never been a golden age of journalism, and it's easy to look back and think, oh, things were better in the past. But you know what? Our audience now on the EDP is immense. It is larger than it's ever been. People are consuming our journalism, and we are writing far more than we ever have in an industry that has been struggling and is still struggling financially. So the pressures on our guys now are huge. 30 years ago, a reporter might write a story a day. My guys now are writing 7 or 8, and I demand that the quality is as good. Yes, you're going to get the odd typo, but the beauty of the internet is it's never wrong for long. So you know, but that's always been the case. I look at EDPs from 30, 50 years ago downstairs in our incredible library, and the quality is no better. In fact, often it's worse, because in those days, and even when I first started, the journalists were spending a lot of time in the pub.
Inserting little letters one by one, weren't you?
Hot metal, yeah, hot metal. I mean, things have changed immensely since then. But yeah, I mean, I am a huge advocate for journalism. You know, I've got 3 kids, and if I think lots of people would say, "Oh, I would never tell your kids to go into journalism. It's not very well paid." It becomes an obsession. It's an addiction that takes over your entire life. All those things are absolutely true. But do you know what? I've been around the world. I've interviewed every prime minister, back to John Major. He wasn't prime minister when I interviewed him, but nonetheless, I've been, you know, I've had the honour of spending time in Westminster. I've been in Number 10. I've been to political conferences. In fact, we've been to them together, Lana. I've reported on huge moments of change. You know, the financial crash, the tube bombings. terrible. I've been allowed a window into people's grief and joy, and I absolutely think that we are the first draft of history, and we can also enact change. There are things that I've had in my career through investigations on regional newspapers. 4 ne'er-do-wells were rightly sent to prison, and I don't believe they would have been caught by the police alone. They were doing things that were under the radar. And I've had such a wonderful time, and absolutely, I'm so excited about what we're doing now as well. What we are achieving. We are one of the few regional newspaper groups that still has a very active investigations team. We're still sending those people to prison. We're still looking under stones. We're still not just driven by web hits. That's very important. Of course, we want a large audience because we're a business and we have to make money. But we also understand that investigations are so important, and they might take 2 or 3 weeks to do because you've got to do them properly. We will never just put out, here are Norfolk's 10 cutest kittens, and on the back of that say, oh, look at our audience, isn't it great? We're still committed to being in council meetings, to being, we got 2 guys down at court today. We go to council meetings all the time. Often they're virtual these days, of course. But
I know it's so much easier now, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I think our reporters certainly. I mean, I'm the politics editor as well, not just over Norfolk, over the whole of the east of England. So those guys would love to get back because you can see the sweat on the councillors' brows when they're challenging something. But we absolutely want to be doing what's right for our readers and for our community. Only this week we gave 5 pages of the EDP over to young people who feel that they've had a particularly tough time during coronavirus, that they're not getting their money's worth from universities. They're struggling in the jobs market. And also at the same time are being accused of being the people that are behind the second spike. It must be incredibly difficult for them. So we absolutely want to give a voice to the people who don't have the voice, to shine a light into the darkest corners and see what's there, to poke around. Often there's nothing there, but sometimes there is, and that's our job, that's our duty. And
so that kind of brings me down to, so this is your vocation. It's and you're so passionate about what you do. What would you say that your personal values are that underpin what you do? Because I think I know, and I think that's why I've kind of stayed in touch with you, because I think that in certain ways you and I are not dissimilar in the way we approach things, because or in what we want to achieve, because there's some core values there that really underpin, that really make it worthwhile, that really make this work. It's something that you just actually really love, and it gives you so much satisfaction. So what would you say your kind of core values are that underpin what you do? What are you?
Without wanting to make this halo get tighter, I don't want to come across as a.
But I'm asking, Richard. Because I think because you mentioned one, and that's the truth, isn't it? So
I think. Listen, I grew up in a difficult, in a fairly difficult situation. I wouldn't change my childhood for anything, but I grew up in a very a pretty poor household, a single parent household in the 80s. In the north of England, and they were tough times. I thought that my mum just really loved beans on toast. It turns out she couldn't afford to eat much else. But I didn't feel any injustice then. It wasn't until I became a little bit older and was probably in my teens that I thought, that's when people started saying to me. I remember very vividly when I was 8 or 9 years old, I got a report back, and I was no great superstar at primary school, and it said the best opportunity for Richard to make money would be as a labourer. Right now, there's a couple of points here. That is hugely offensive to labourers. Where would we be without labourers? who build these incredible buildings and houses and etc. So firstly, that is hugely offensive to them. I would probably earn more as a labourer, but secondly, how can you write off an 8-year-old kid? But it felt like, looking back, it felt like that's what was the case. Lots of people said to me, lots of careers advisors, if I mentioned journalism or mentioned, well, why don't you try supermarkets like we discussed, or why don't you try getting a job as a bank clerk or whatever? All perfectly good jobs, but not the job I actually wanted. Not the job I actually wanted. But why would a kid? I went to a very poor comprehensive school as well with lots of problems, and it seemed like I was being told what my future was going to be, and that is when I started to kick back. And when I finally made the decision, no, I am going to be a journalist. And if I don't become a journalist, it won't be because I haven't tried my very hardest. It'll be because either I'm not good enough, and that's fine. I can live with that as long as I've tried. I always say to my kids, as long as you do your absolute best and you can prove it, I don't care whether you get an A or an F, as long as you're trying as hard as you can. It was such a freedom I had then. So I think that I'm driven by hopefully giving a voice to people who maybe don't have it, I think, and through no fault of their own. And also by, and this sounds really, lots of my colleagues will watch this and think, what a wally, but by injustice as well, by people who ring up and say, even little things, like people who ring up and say, we've had this a lot recently, I bought a holiday and now I'm being told I can't have my money back, or, sorting those problems out for our readers and for our community, I think it is hugely important. And also I do a lot of work now, and I'm going to be, a little spoiler alert now, I'm going to be doing a lot more work on this, looking at the region as a whole and everyone in it, how a rising tide can lift, the whole of the east of England. I've seen it in Yorkshire especially. Yorkshire was a part of the world which was pretty much on its knees at the end of the 70s and into the early 80s. And I'm not going to get political at all, because I think that pretty much every government forever has done good things and bad things for the north of England and for the east and for every region. But the loss of industry and manufacturing was huge in the north of England. In hindsight, it had to happen. I would question whether it had to happen that quickly, but what that region then did was right, we're going to help ourselves. And the East has been a little bit more protected, but there has come a time now where technology and lots of other things have caught up with what has been a nice, fairly secure life here in the east of England, and we were going to be left behind by the Northern Powerhouse, by the Midlands engine. We need to supercharge what we do.
Yeah, you just have to look at the transport, don't you? It's
a perfect example. So what I'm now really engaged in is putting pressure on our leaders, on our politicians, on our councillors, to not take the comfortable route anymore. Maybe to do things that are uncomfortable and might be uncomfortable for a while, to ensure that our children can stay here if they want to, that they don't have to go off to London, they don't have to go off to Manchester or abroad. They can actually build their careers and their dreams right here in Norwich, in Cromer, in Yarmouth, in Thetford, in Ipswich, in North Essex, here in the east of England. And so that is something that I think I have the voice to be able to promote that. And it's something that I'm absolutely passionate about. And that is something that we're really going to ramp up. We kicked it off really last November when we had Boris Johnson in the office here, and we said to him, these are the 10 things that the East of England need, and we've been overlooked. And and it might be infrastructure, it might be broadband, it might be getting parity for mental health issues, it might be an increase in spending in our hospitals. There's hundreds of them, but we gave him 10. And in the fashion that he has become famous for, he said, "Yes, of course, we will do all that." I'm going to make sure that we hold him to account on that. Now, of course, this year has somewhat thrown everyone into a spin, and it's been a little bit difficult to do that.
Well, yes, exactly. And I think that's partly what I want to talk to you about is, do you feel that, because I obviously, somebody who's visually impaired, I have my own experience about how, this pandemic and, lockdown and coming out of lockdown and going back into restrictions is playing out for, disabled people, visually impaired people who are just generally probably, I think it's difficult to say on the fringes, but, not the strong majority, if you know what I mean. And I just wonder, how do you feel? Because you have oversight, as political and business editor, you probably see things more on a macro level. But do you feel this, is the divide getting bigger or smaller? Are we leveling out? Or is it just, or is life that wasn't particularly easy before the pandemic just getting a heck of a lot more difficult for people who just, already, through no fault of their own, are kind of getting a bit of a short straw here? So how do you feel it's working out from where you see it?
I think there is a real danger that that there becomes not a class divide, but a divide between those who are a bigger divide between those who are able and those who can cope with the new normal, however long that lasts for, and those who are less able to do so. And that worries me immensely. I mean, I remember being quite startled way back in the midst of the chaos that was March and April at and I know we don't want to get too political, and I'm not being, because I absolutely understand how difficult it must be, and I've got friends who work in government, how difficult it must be on a day-to-day basis to get this right. This is, and I know this word's been overused this year, but this is unprecedented. But when we were discussing the emergency, or when politicians were discussing the emergency law back in March, and how there might have to be some changes to the way we do things with regards to how we combat the pandemic, there was a freeing of local authority responsibility. I think it's Schedule 10 or 11. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. Which was the duties that they were bound to under the CARE Act, which is 2014, and that basically says what local authorities, the very minimum standard of care that they have to give to, a great swathe of the community, whether they've got mental health issues or are physically disabled or whatever. And I don't think it was done on purpose. I think it was just an oversight because of how quickly everything had to go through.
Yeah,
but but the very apocalyptic view, because there haven't been the scrutiny of that we would normally have, and I do think that we make our laws in a very sensible way in this country, but because there wasn't the ability and time for that scrutiny, and this hasn't happened to my knowledge in any great way, shape or form, but we actually freed up councils to go, we can't look after these people anymore because we've got to do this instead. We've got to look after these people. And that is wrong. And even though that might not have been enacted, and let's fingers crossed hope it never is, I think it sends out an incorrect message. But on a day-to-day basis, though, Lana, on a day-to-day basis, without wanting to get too much into policy and into acts of law and things like that, just on a day-to-day basis, it's difficult enough for me, who am able-bodied and have my sight, thank goodness. I'm very lucky to find my way around a supermarket with all the one-way systems and things. It must be incredibly difficult to rediscover and refamiliarize yourselves with things when you can't actually see the signage, when, I know that shops will be doing the very best they can in difficult circumstances to help everyone. But I would imagine if you are a very independent person who has got sight issues, you don't want to be helped by someone. You want to be able to do it yourself. And even the ability to go shopping and go around a store that's got a very strict one-way system in place. There's a story in the paper today of someone who is unable to wear a face mask for medical reasons and was refused entry into a shop, even though they had a medical card saying, we have to educate store workers. I'm sure that they just thought they were doing the right thing. I don't think there was any malice towards disabled people, but we've got to make sure that people know that life is even tougher if you are starting from a different place to the average Joe. And I'm
that's
really worried that is not getting through.
I think that's where I'm coming from, because clearly life, things weren't great before lockdown. Let's face it. There's all sorts of, and just living with a disability. I promise you, I know everybody's got their cross to bear, but sometimes it just sucks. It just actually just sucks. But you get on with it, and within an environment that you're kind of used to and accustomed to, you can kind of find your way around. Now, the sands are shifting so fast these days, and actually I think more worryingly is the attitude seems to be quite gung-ho in certain ways. Like I've had, I never have issues when I'm out and about, not usually, as people who are generally fine, but stuff's happened to me. I've been thrown out of my local supermarket.
Wow.
Like how? Just by two brand new marshals, didn't know who I am. They didn't realise I was the district councillor. In front of all of the staff who were actually my residents, they threw me out of the supermarket because my husband said that he wanted to come shopping with me. I talked about in the third person. I was like, oh my God, this is actually incredible.
Me.
Yeah, I know. But then there's kind of other collateral sort of almost damage creeping in, where it's almost like, if you need something else, if you need different treatment, if you need, you're almost treasonous in asking for it. If for example, it's like, oh well, we all have to get on with it, we all have to pitch in, we all have to do our bit. But when you think, I actually can't. I mean, for example, in a meeting the other day, I had trouble accessing, between, normal stuff happened. I had trouble accessing the papers. The chairman actually suggested during the meeting that I print them off for myself. Like, are you kidding me? And this would have never normally happened under normal circumstances. But I just think we are in such odd times, and everybody's sort of expected to pitch in at the same level. And I'm finding that a lot of visually impaired people, a lot of disabled people didn't come out of lockdown properly at all, because when they were told to shield, and then they said, well, you don't have to shield anymore. And they're going, well, what's changed? Really? There's still a pandemic out there. Nothing's curbing the infection rate. To actually the physical environment being so hostile, from the changes on the buses to actually having to sanitize all the time, to wearing face masks, which are, for a lot of people, our guide dogs are lovely, but they kind of can't hear very well when you're talking through a face mask. And I just feel, and and then, as you say, lots of bits of legislation coming through that just really weren't thought through, that local authorities are then kind of having to sort of think, maybe not, maybe yes, but having to take a pragmatic view on, to even going back to school. I think I may have mentioned this to you before, anecdotally, there are visually impaired children who kind of aren't in school yet because literally their mainstream environments can't cater for what would be an acceptable level in and you can't blame the teachers really, because the schools are already overcrowded. 36 to a classroom, or however many. How do you socially distance, do anything at all other than get through the day, is nigh on impossible. And I just think that divide, that gap is getting bigger in ways that I wonder whether we're going to recover, because it's not just what's happening physically, it's kind of a mindset that's creeping in as well with it, that it's okay to behave in a certain way. It's okay to, grab every last toilet paper in the supermarket. It's okay to, it's okay to hoard resources. It's okay to, I think, as a society we've morphed slightly in a way that isn't helpful to integration. So that's my spiel. And so what do you think?
My other concern on the horizon is the end of the furlough scheme. I understand the economics behind why that is not a scheme that can last indefinitely. But I think what we're going to see at the end of that furlough scheme is a huge spike in job losses. And, I would implore employers to ensure that they're not making decisions on, I know they will have to make very many tough decisions on job losses, but they've got to be so careful that there's not discrimination happening there, and it's not a presenteeism. I'm very lucky I can come back into my office. There are other people who work in this business who are unable to do that yet, but they're still doing a fantastic job. And I'm not suggesting by any way there will be any job losses here at Archant, but that's something that I read a piece by the Chief Commissioner of the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland. I think I've got it written down actually, Geraldine McGahey, I think she's called, and she has raised that point as well. Not just about the huge job losses, but that there are great fears among the disabled workforce that they are going to be the first in the queue, no matter whether their work is as good as everyone else's, simply because it's very difficult to get them back into the office because they're shielding or because of social distancing is more difficult or whatever reason. And I think that employers will be shooting themselves in the foot there and losing good people simply because it might be a bit easier. And, I always say that the easiest route is almost never the best route. So that is the next thing that's on the horizon. And we've got to be so careful. And I think that we do need to have more from, whether it's from Westminster or Whitehall, and there is a very significant difference between those two things. There's got to be often lumped together, but very, very different. There's got to be, I really would like to see more coming from the Equality Commission with regards to guidelines and how we recover and make sure that we don't leave people behind, because we will recover. It doesn't seem like that sometimes, but there will be a recovery. There will be a vaccine. We will get back to normal. It'll be a different world. And we've got to make sure that this is actually, from another one of my sayings, from chaos comes great opportunity. This is awful right now. 2020 has been crap. We haven't been able to go on holidays, most of us. We've missed our work colleagues.
Yeah, but you don't like going on holidays. You like grabbing
That's
your bag
true.
in the middle of the
I do.
night,
I do. I'm not a big. You're quite right. I'm not a big fan of holidays, but most normal people are, and quite rightly. But
it's all right. I had 2 weeks in Cornwall, so I'm not complaining.
You're lucky. But we will get back to a new normal, and actually, this chaos offers us a great opportunity, in my opinion, and I'm not normally an optimist, but it gives us a great opportunity to right some wrongs that were there before, to level up, to make sure that the rising tide does lift all the boats. But we've got to be so careful that we don't leave anyone behind. And I'm not just talking about the disabled community that we're by and large talking to now, of course, or the visually impaired, but the people who are living in poverty, people who, like me, thought that they couldn't do a thing because they were from a certain background. There is so much talent in this country from every single walk of life, and we've got to ensure that those people are given the opportunities. And this is an opportunity for us to do that, to work differently, to work smarter, to work better. But at the moment, I would love to see someone. It would be great if there was someone planning not just how we recover economically, and that is hugely important. Don't get me wrong, that is the sort of thing that makes me wake up in the middle of the night and reach for my copy of Maynard Keynes, But we not just that, socially as well. We've got to, this country, whatever you think of Brexit, that's going to be disruptive as well, whether for better or worse. Certainly not getting into that here.
We're
not allowed to talk about
Richard.
that. But
no, apparently not. Yeah, no, I got. I can't remember who I booked. I was talking to, I think it was Jerome, and Chloe's obviously coming to the forum tomorrow. So, and I got an email from Guide Dog saying no Brexit.
No Brexit. Well, in that case,
so we're not talking about Brexit. And we're having
what I will say is that there are changes afoot. There are changes afoot, and it is down to all of us to make sure that they work for everyone.
And if somebody can get Clive Lewis on here for me so I can achieve political balance, I will be terribly grateful, because apparently
we can give Clive a nudge. I'm sure he'd be delighted.
But you know what? I think the forum is actually based in the Annesley Hotel, you know, when we're still allowed to meet in real life on Newmarket Road, which is bang smack in his
Yeah,
constituency.
right in his patch. Yeah, yeah.
Come and talk to us. That would be really lovely. Chloe's coming, so, you know, you can come too. That would be really good. So.
They do that. The only problem with politicians, of course, is, and I know you are a politician, Lana, the problem with politicians is...
I'm retired.
Retired, okay. But with politicians at that level, they just want to talk about politics the whole time, don't they? And that can become deathly dull.
I don't know. I think I'm quite looking to Chloe coming to the forum tomorrow because I don't think we could. But anyway, I don't know. It depends on what questions.
Chloe will be great. Chloe's great. She'll be fantastic.
Chloe's sweet. Yeah. So yeah, she couldn't come in July because I think somebody rang the phone and said she had to be in a meeting, and so she had to cancel. So she's coming to this September one, which is really kind of her. So
that'll be good. She works very hard. They all do, actually. What I will say about politicians is not many. There's this view of MPs, certainly, that they've got their feet up and they're rinsing their expenses. They work hugely hard. They work, most of them, 95% of them work bloody hard. Yeah. It's not. I wouldn't want to do that job. It's really tough. Really tough.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Okay, right. I think on that note, Richard, I think I'm going to say thank you ever so much for coming to talk to us.
It's been today. An absolute pleasure. I'd be delighted to come and talk on any subject you want me to. And if anyone's watching this and have got and has got an instance whereby they feel that the new world has not worked for them, then it's absolutely the sort of thing we want to hear about, because actually we tend to sort the problem out, because when we ring companies or bus firms or whoever and say this happened, they tend to go, oh, bugger, we better make sure that never happens again. And now it's going in the newspaper. So we are an agent for change. We can make things better. So, send me an email.
Yeah, okay. So, well, that's a really good offer from Richard. So if anybody, so is there a particular email address that's kind of best for you guys at the EDP?
Yeah, it's if you can send, I can by all means send it to my personal email address. It's richard.porritt, that's PORRITT, at archant, archant.co.uk. And I get about 700 emails a day, so if it gets overlooked, send it again. Lana, that happened to you only last week that I overlooked one of your emails.
I know.
Keep sending it, and I will pick it up.
But I mean, there must be a news desk that picks up stories as well. So or does it?
You can always just pick up the phone. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if you look in the paper or on the website, the contact details are all there, so you can certainly get. There's a number of ways you can get in touch with us.
Yeah. Okay. So if anything happens, sort of untowards, crikey, I think it happens at an alarming regularity.
I'm sure it does. We'd love to hear about it. Absolutely. And if we can help, we'll do our best. Yeah.
Do you know, I am firmly a believer that people, I don't know, it's not malice. It's just that everybody's in such a rush and just enclosed and got so much. I think a friend of mine described it as brainful with other things that you just don't think that actually there is variances in ability and understanding, and that we are a diverse society, and it's and I think when you sort of ram things down one road, I mean, it's not a surprise really, the Black Lives Matters thing, flared up, because there's a lot of people who already perhaps feel on the margins, think that, well, now we're just being completely overlooked now, and it's and I think that's what we working through, what is finding those opportunities and seizing those opportunities and making it more positive. Zoom is great for me. I don't have to go anywhere. All of a sudden, the fact that I can't drive doesn't matter anymore. It's brilliant. So I can just do my meetings like everybody can, one meeting to another within half a minute, and it's brilliant. So there are opportunities. It's just making sure that we've got the right people on board, that we don't end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because it can and will happen, not through malice or ill will. It just does. So
it just slips. And I think, like I said, and I think you're saying the same thing, from this god awful year, there is an opportunity for this country and more regionally for this part of the world to grow and become better, to become more inclusive, for opportunities to be given to more people. And, the example of Zoom and technology is a great one. We need to grasp that opportunity to make technology work for us as humans and to make everyone's life better across the board. But we have to keep the pressure on to make sure that happens.
Yeah, we do. I mean, as I said, in manufacturing, everything, there's just so much that, we as a country are going to be doing from now on, because I suppose we've learnt our lessons as what happens when we don't. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, right, Richard, thank you ever so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Going to, thanks guys to everybody who tuned in today and listened to Richard and I have a bit of a reminisce and a rattle on, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Next week I've got, oh my God, I've got such a surprise for you. I've got I have a Paralympic gold medalist.
Oh my goodness, how can I compete, Lana, with
that? You can't, mate. I'm just saying you can't, and she's pretty as well. So,
flipping heck.
Just saying. So she's going to go and join me and talk to us about her career and cycling and getting gold medals and just being an exceptional human being, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. As much, I'm sure, Richard, you'll tune in for that one, won't
definitely,
you?
Definitely.
Right. So it's bye from me for now.